Epstein is this one conversation, and these are more common experiences than any of us really acknowledge. And like, imagine if you were sharing your most personal, harmful thing that you have potentially experienced in your life, and the entire community, or right now, the entire world has opinions on it. Every time we make a comment or share thoughts on a survivor or victim story in the news, there's somebody in our community that's relating to that story, and they're hearing what we're saying and saying that's what they would say to me.
All good work is done in defiance of management.
I'm going to tell you the truth, whether you like it or not.
Go ahead, give me the finger.
The Dan Parsons Show.
Hey, welcome to the hottest political podcast in Nebraska, The Dan Parsons Show. And I'm your host, Dan Parsons. Hey, coming up on today's show, a very important and serious topic, the latest on the Epstein saga. We'll interview Alex Pecoraro. Alex is a prevention strategist with the Nebraska Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. But before I introduce Alex, here's the latest. As you probably know, both the U.S. House and the Senate have overwhelmingly approved a bill that demands that the Justice Department release all of the Epstein files. But as of this recording, obviously it could change by the time you hear and see this episode, but as of right now, the bill has not yet been presented to the president, and it wasn't clear when it might reach his desk. But Mr. Trump said this week he would sign the legislation promising, quote, to give them everything. So during Trump's campaign, just a reminder of how we got here, during the campaign, Donald Trump promised that he would release the information. And a lot of his, the base of his support voted for him because of that. He then got into office and apparently was shown what's in the files, and he changed his mind. And now, when he realized that he was about to lose the fight in Congress, he then changed his mind again and said, okay, go ahead and release it. Well, here's what I'm growing a little tired of. Well, there's several things I'm growing tired of about this story, but one in particular is the Republican talking point, which frankly, there's been one Republican in particular on this show who has used this line, and which says that if Democrats controlled the White House for 4 years, why didn't they release the Epstein files? Well, Julie Brown, who is the Miami Herald journalist who broke this story, her investigative research and story led to the arrests of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. She said this, quote, the Epstein case was an open and active criminal investigation under the Biden administration. They prosecuted Maxwell and she appealed. You don't open a case file when it's under active appeal, the journalist said. They were also still likely investigating others implicated in Epstein's crimes. She said, this is prosecution 101. So there you go. That explains that little tidbit. But opponents of the law apparently have another plan to stop it. Just this afternoon, House Speaker Mike Johnson's office circulated a document detailing 5 flaws in the bill as an alternative plan to stop it. Speaker Johnson quoted the document saying the bill, quote, jeopardizes future federal investigations and presents national security concerns regarding classified information, end quote. So essentially, Johnson is arguing that the Trump administration should have final say, citing national security. So we're not done yet. But here's my bottom line. The children and the women who were victims of these unspeakable crimes deserve justice. And it's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. It's time to release all the files. Okay, enough of my soapbox. Here's my interview with Alex Pecoraro. Well, as I mentioned in my opening, I wanted to talk today about the Epstein story. And while this story continues to move fast with lots of political maneuvering going on, and we'll keep you posted, audience, on all of that. But today I wanted to talk about what is often left out of this story, and that's the victims. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about Democrats or Republicans and who's winning political points with their voters, but it's about the victims of these unspeakable crimes. So to help us do just that, it's my pleasure to welcome to the show Alex Pecoraro, prevention strategist with the Nebraska Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. Alex, welcome to the Dan Parsons Show.
Hello, Dan, and thank you for having me on the Dan Parsons Show.
Yeah, I'm delighted to talk to you, Alex, and I appreciate the work that you do and being willing to talk about this issue. And like I said, this isn't about the political stuff. I leave that to those political hacks. I want to talk about the work that you do and this horrible crimes against young women and girls. So maybe to start, Alex, maybe give us a little background on your role with the coalition and maybe the mission and work of the Nebraska Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking those questions.
Yeah.
So I'm the prevention strategist, which you and other folks listening might be like, what does that mean? My entire role is to explore in the state of Nebraska, how do we prevent sexual violence, domestic violence, human trafficking, all these different forms of these really personal types of violence from happening, right? Like, how do we make someone never become a survivor or victim? So this might look at exploring what access to housing across Nebraska looks like, or access to food and education and healthcare. We really get to look upstream at the issue that's happening. And even prior to coming in Nebraska, I've also worked in Arkansas and Kansas, and I've done direct service. So I've worked directly with police officers and forensics nurse examiners, and I've done direct client services. So I kind of have the gamut of experience for how I've been in this field of this work.
Nice. Maybe before we get started, because we are going to, talk about some pretty serious, obviously, issues here. Is there a phone number, a hotline for anyone that may be impacted by this conversation? If they need help and assistance to reach out, could you give us some resources for people?
Absolutely. I encourage folks to take space as they need it. So if you need to take a break, feel free to pause and come back to this when you're ready and able. And if folks are listening to this and it's bringing up their own emotions from their own experiences, or they know folks who have experience, you can go to a national organization, the RAINN Abuse Incest National Network at RAINN.org. And you can call them at 1-800-656-4673. They are available 24/7. And for folks in the state of Nebraska, if you go to nebraskacoalition.org/get_help, you can actually find a local organization that offers 24/7 hotline services in every single county across the state. So you can find local resources as well.
Excellent. Well, we'll put those in our show notes, and we'll also have it on screen for our video watchers. So, well, let's start, Alex. I've spent several days following this story, and I spent some time this morning listening and watching the victims' news conference out in Washington, D.C. And anyway, so I settled on a video that I want both of us to watch. And it's a CNN interview with Amy Wallace, who is the co-author of Nobody's Girl, the memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice by Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who tragically died by suicide earlier this year, just months before the publication of her book. But she's a survivor of sexual assault at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And she was recruited by Maxwell at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago spa when she was only 16 years old. And so let's take a moment and everybody watch this. It's a little long, so I apologize, but I think it sets us up quite well to have this conversation. So let's.
True disclosure today in the publication of Virginia Roberts Giuffre's posthumous autobiography, the title Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. Co-author Amy Wallace joins us in just a moment. Giuffre died by suicide earlier this year, but she documented the abuse she suffered at the hands of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Quoting now from the book, "Just when I thought things couldn't get worse for me, they did. Epstein trafficked me to a man who raped me more savagely than anyone had before. We were on Epstein's island when I was ordered to take this man to a cabana. Immediately, it was clear that this man, whom I've taken pains to describe in legal filings only as a well-known prime minister, wasn't interested in caresses. He wanted violence. He repeatedly choked me until I lost consciousness and took pleasure in seeing me in fear for my life." About Prince Andrew, she writes, quote, "I hadn't wanted to have sex with the prince, I said, but I felt I had to. Our livelihoods depended on it, for one thing, but I also truly believed there was no way for me to free myself from Epstein and Maxwell's grip." And then there's this, quote, "He put his hand on my back, a fond gesture that was rare for him. I hope you know how much I appreciate you for embracing my lifestyle," he began, as Maxwell cozied up to me, up next to me too. "Over the past several months, you've shown me a devotion that is difficult to find. The friends I've introduced you to agree. You are a delightful young woman." He took a breath and wondered where all this was going, and I wondered where all this was going. Then he came out with it. "Jenna, I want you to have our baby." Joining us now is her co-author, Amy Wallace. It's just remarkable. I mean, the details in this. Near the end of the book, she says, "I don't regret it, but the constant telling and retelling has been extremely painful and exhausting. With this book, I seek to free myself from my past." You worked with her for 4 years. How do you think she would feel to have this out in the public now?
Well, she made it very clear how she would feel because she sent me an email about 3 weeks before she died saying, "In the case of my passing, I want this book published, not just for me, but for all survivors of sexual abuse, not just Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but for anyone who has been coerced into sex against their will." So she very much wanted this book published, and I think she would be very proud, and it's a victory for her even after her passing.
She writes in the book, "I believe that I might die a sex slave." And another point says, "Inside I was seething. Day and night, my every waking moment was circumscribed by his wants and needs," talking about Epstein. "I was caught in the trap of familiar diminishment, but still something about Epstein's hold on me kept me docile and acquiescent." What do you think it was at the core of it?
Well, I think she writes about this really eloquently. You know, there's sort of a predator's playbook in this narrative, in this memoir. Not only were these girls lured into a home thinking they were going to give a massage and then sexually, raped and assaulted by both Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but then they were also had this sort of mental jujitsu that the classic groomer does, which is, we are going to degrade you sexually, emotionally, physically, but we are also going to tell you, we see something in you, you're special. And a lot of these girls had not heard that ever, and some of them definitely had not heard it enough. And there was this class issue as well. They were poor girls for the most part. They were chosen from the seedier side of the tracks. They were desperate financially, and these posh people were telling them they saw promise in them. And there was Virginia writes about it really movingly, that was kind of what kept her enmeshed in that world, because she did feel validated in a very strange way. In her case also, and this may have been true for other victims, she was actually threatened by Jeffrey Epstein. He showed her a picture of Sky, who I believe you've interviewed, her younger brother, 5 years younger, and said, "We know where he goes to school. If you ever turn on me, I will hurt him." So she had a lot of things keeping her in line.
So we'll stop there, Alex, but man, that's difficult. I've listened to that a couple different times now. So does that sound familiar to you as a specialist in this area? Does that make sense and sound familiar to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I encourage folks to take a deep breath if you need to, because that was a lot. Yeah. And I think Amy said it really well in that interview, that book also exemplifies almost like a playbook for someone who's perpetrated or someone who even plans to perpetrate. And she hit on like multiple things related to like power and access and resources, kind of what I said about in the beginning about what my role is, about how are we exploring folks' access to resources and in safe spaces and safe adults. Amy hit on multiple of those that Virginia talked about in the book related to compliments and praise from adults, needing financial resources, maybe even needing like housing resources, and how that led to this moment of someone saying, I can exploit this and I can manipulate and harm these people and get what I want from them.
Yeah, I found that interesting as well. And, obviously, and again, I've done some of the other research and listened to some of the other survivors, and there is a thread of commonality here, because many of them did not have a lot of means, and they were promised, all kinds of things, whether it was modeling careers or, whatever those things were, money and riches and obviously trips and everything. And they preyed on these young women, these young girls who had very little.
We always hear jokes about the idea of like someone with candy in a car, right? And when we get more serious into the conversation of like when someone is a teenager or a young adult and someone's offering them things related to, I can make your dreams come true, or I can give you a place to sleep. How does that relate to how they can be exploited? And are we properly preparing folks to know how to engage that, or how to acknowledge when that's happening and support someone or get help themselves?
Yeah, and she even said that, she felt obviously validated by these words and these deeds. And it's just hard. I think it's hard for a lot of us to imagine that, but at the same time, the more I listen to these victims and by the way, just for our audience, maybe for your knowledge, I very early in my career, I worked in the Nebraska Attorney General's office, and I dealt with victims for different crimes, and so I was involved in helping victims through the years early in my career. So I have had some experience, but there seems to be some patterns that that these people look for, that these predators look for, and that was certainly the case with Maxwell and Epstein.
Well, you are 100% correct, right? And the theme through these women that we're hearing speak about the pattern, I think, is evident of, even outside of this Epstein case, what we can be aware of in our communities to make the communities that we're a part of safer, right? Like Epstein is this one conversation, and these are more common experiences than any of us really acknowledge. And like, I think this is our chance now as a collective in Nebraska and the United States to really lean into it and start to build safer spaces for everyone.
Yeah. One of the other things that I find just very interesting and very sad is, and again, I listened to all of the victims, or not all the victims, many of the victims that held the news conference out in Washington. And one of the themes was, for many of them, it took a long time for them to come forward. Some of them just now coming forward after years and years and years. They feel finally, safe is probably not the right word, but certainly more safe and more brave to step out. And because they have this sisterhood of people around them now. And so maybe talk a little bit about that, of this, first of all, shame, whether it's male or female, in these sexual assaults and sexual, predators. And so, maybe talk a little bit about that, of the silence that is around this issue.
Yeah. And Dan, I just want to say thank you so much for mentioning the idea of men and women, because we often talk about this as an issue that impacts women, and men are also can be victims and survivors, and this relates to everyone. And when I think you hit it really well with the word of shame. So I kind of think it's twofold when we think of folks not coming forward. There's kind of this category of maybe there's a bit of like lack of knowledge, or like they're not even aware that something happened to them. And then on the flip, there's this shame and secrecy around it, that if they come forward, that it's going to end up being their fault and they're going to be blamed for it, or people aren't going to believe them and they're going to have been able to do something different, as folks like to say. When we think of the idea that folks don't know, can I ask you, Dan, have you ever heard that before? This idea that like maybe someone doesn't know that what happened to them was wrong?
100%. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think this relates to when we think about something like healthy relationship education. I know I didn't have those conversations till I was like in college. And so people sometimes don't realize until they're having those conversations when they're older or even in adulthood with friends. And they're like, what happened to me shouldn't have happened. And then in the same boat with that, sometimes the brain, to protect us, can block out memories, right? When someone's experiencing trauma, memories
Absolutely.
aren't forming in the same way. And so they might not even know. So when someone comes out 10, 20, 15, 25 years later, people can be like, well, why didn't they say something when it happened? They might not have known.
And the difficulty that presents for law enforcement.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, I've been in law enforcement and I understand some of those challenges, but I think we're seeing that in some of that in this case. And years and years later, people are being able to confront the perpetrators of these crimes, and now these victims are being re-victimized
100%.
by having all this in the news, and they're recognizing people that that they may have had relationships with as other victims during those times, and now all these years later, maybe they haven't had a chance to deal with these issues or maybe even acknowledge them, and so now they're being re-victimized again through all of this.
And that ties directly to that shame piece that you mentioned,
Yes.
like the fear of folks wanting to come forward, because part of the re-victimization is we can open any news article right now and read the comments, or we can hear conversation on the street, and there's a lot of different opinions going around of what people think of stuff. And imagine if you were sharing your most personal, intimate, harmful thing that you have potentially experienced in your life, and the entire community, or right now the entire world, has opinions on it. Like every time we make a comment or share thoughts on a survivor or victim story in the news, there's somebody in our community that's relating to that story, and they're hearing what we're saying and saying that's what they would say to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, not to go back to the political, but that's what I do. It's part of what has pissed me off so much about this story. I mean, even the most powerful man in the world is calling this a hoax. And again, I think take the political stuff out of it. I'm just thinking about those victims who maybe have not dealt with this and maybe not even, gone to law enforcement, and now they're hearing the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States, calling this a hoax, and how painful and confusing and just terrible that must be. And so again, I'm take the political stuff out of it. It's just for those victims. I think it goes to they weren't believed probably to begin with, and now here is the culture. Somebody in the culture saying that, it's just a hoax, he just made this up, whatever. And so anyway, just re-victimizing and the pain just multiplying on these folks.
100%. And I think when I think of my role at the Nebraska Coalition, and even in other positions I've been in, I'm grateful that I've always been in a position where I get to be in a role where I believe the survivor, right? Like when we talk about trauma-informed care, we trust folks who say that they've experienced harm. When we look at the rates of false reporting, they're so minimal. They match other crimes, and we don't respond to other crimes the same way. Like if someone told me their car got broken into, the first response would never be like, are you sure that happened? Like, are you sure your window got like knocked in? Right. And so I think we have to take that mentality when survivors and victims come forward with their stories. And sometimes it is directly going against the culture that exists that says, well, we should question them. Maybe we should be questioning the other person first, right? Or other people in the community who saw something and didn't say something and believe what's being told to us.
One of the conversations that is at the center of this issue with the Epstein files is position of power. And, that's what we do here on the Dan Parsons Show is we hold people in power to account. And that dynamic is on full display in this issue. So maybe talk a little bit about that, the position of power and sexual assault.
Yeah, I think when people hear sexual assault and sexual violence, if they're not in this field, or like you shared that you previously worked with survivors and victims, they kind of go to the idea of like sex. It's related to sex and bodies. In actuality, it's related to power. We can look at any situation where someone has experienced harm and we can see a power imbalance. It might be that somebody has access to more money. It might be that someone has access to housing. Maybe they're older. Maybe they have a position of authority at work or in a social setting, right? Someone knows that they have power over someone, and that's going to limit someone's ability to be able to say no or challenge them or to ask for help because they have so much power and clout and they know how to use it. So I encourage folks, when you think about the conversation of sexual assault or sexual violence, think about it through power and not through sex, because it actually has nothing to do with sex. It is specifically about power and control over someone else.
One of the other issues that has really, I think, enraged a lot of people, and that's the podcaster and former television journalist Megyn Kelly making comments recently about basically the age of consent. And she was trying to suggest that some women, some girls who are 14 maybe are more sexually active and seen as older than they are, and made it sound like it's okay to have sex with girls who are 14 instead of 5-year-olds. She said, anyway, it was just a bizarre comment from someone who should know better. So anyway, thoughts on that.
The conversation of age and consent, I think, has been ongoing for decades now about kind of where's the line and when can people do X, Y, and Z. And I think it comes back to, we all generally understand that kids are kids, but for some reason when we start to talk about something like sexual violence or sex, people start to have questions about ages. We know that there's different laws across the state about what the actual age of consent is, and it boils down to teenagers are teenagers. We can look at psychologically, like how and when the brain develops. And I know when I was 15, 16, 17, I was not in a place to make decisions. I was still figuring out who I was in the world and how to exist. And so to say that maybe someone who's 17 could have a relationship with a 40-year-old or have a consenting relationship, I think does a disservice to young people in our country and does a disservice to kids. And a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old deserves to be protected the same way that a 5 or a 6-year-old is protected. And so I think we need to remember that we should be protecting everybody. And some of Epstein's survivors were in their young 20s when stuff happens, and they also deserve to be protected. So a lack of consent is a lack of consent, and it doesn't matter what someone's age is.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, maybe talk a little bit, Alex, about what's going on in Nebraska. How do we stack up with our neighboring states or other communities that you've been in? How are we doing here in Nebraska with sexual assault and domestic violence?
Yeah, so Nebraska's rates parallel that of just generally kind of the United States. On that NebraskaCoalition.org website, we actually have a couple data reports that can be pulled, and we're creating a public-facing data dashboard page that folks can pull some of those numbers more specifically. But if we look at like national numbers, they correlate to Nebraska, and they kind of parallel. We're looking at anywhere from like 1 to 2 to like 1 in 2 to like 1 in 6 on the lower end of people who are experiencing some type of sexual violence. And I'm always someone who says like 1 is too many. Like you tell me one person in my community is experiencing it, we need to do something. But we're talking about, at times, depending on what stat is being pulled, half of the population. That's too much. And I will say we do have efforts across the state that are really incredible, working on prevention and also response services that are supporting survivors. And I know as community members, we can always do more, right? And that's why I'm so grateful that you're talking about this today, because this gives everyone listening a chance to say, like, how can I be a part of the solution?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, just looking locally at the headlines, I mean, there have been, I don't have the stories in front of me, but there have been several instances right here in Lincoln of domestic violence that have ended tragically
Yes.
with the death. And so certainly anecdotally, we continue to struggle with this issue.
Yeah. And Nebraska, I believe this year there's been 13 homicides related to domestic violence specifically. And that is fairly on track for previous years. And it's too many, right? Like, one is too many. Like, we want that number to be at 0. And it shows like it is happening in our communities. And so if we're not talking about it, we need to ask ourselves why, and how we can start talking about it and then start taking action to make sure it's not happening anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe, Alex, as we start to wrap up here, I don't want to limit our conversation. This podcast, we can go as long as we like, but maybe talk to that victim who maybe is watching this, or a family member of a victim who's watching this. What would you say to them?
I would say, I believe you. And despite the moments where it feels like you're alone, or other folks aren't getting it, or you don't know who you can talk to, you aren't alone. There are community members, there are resources that are like ready and able to support you. And you do not have to carry this alone. Nobody should have to carry this alone. And I'm sorry that you even have to engage in this conversation, and this should have never happened to you.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for the work that you do. Give us some, some final words on thoughts of the work that you do, and how remind people how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah. I would say sometimes when we have these conversations, they can feel really heavy, and it can feel like it's an impossible thing to navigate or to change. And there are ways to do that. Some simple ways are being a safe adult in the community. So being someone that kids can come to, or other neighbors and people can come to talk to and say, like, this feels weird, or I'm not sure what's happening. Can I talk to you about it? It also means when you see something, say something, intervene, be comfortable kind of stepping into situations and saying, like, hey, that's not safe. Let's cut that out. Pay attention to those signs so we can be a part of the solution, are just some really simple ways. And then some bigger ways is just looking at, as we talked about in the beginning, a lot of the girls and women have expressed access to resources. So what are we doing in Nebraska to make sure people have those resources so someone can't use those to manipulate someone? So like housing and food and medical care. How can we make sure people have what they need so they are secure and good? And then for folks who, during this conversation, they might be thinking about their own experiences or someone else, I encourage you to go to RAINN.org or call that number, 1-800-656-4673, or go to nebraskacoalition.org/get_help to find a local organization around you who can help you navigate whatever you previously experienced or maybe currently experience, and make sure you are able to build the safest path forward for yourself.
I guess finally, does the coalition have the resources you need? I assume, like all nonprofits and organizations, you need more help. What do you need, and what can our audience help with, or what, we have access to people who maybe have the ability to do that. So what are you lacking? What do you need?
Yeah. Dan, that's a beautiful question. So thank you for asking it. One, that Get Help page that I mentioned, like I said, we have organizations across the whole state that touch every county, and they always need donations, be that time, money, or physical donations for things that they're asking for. So if you want a local space, you can go there and check out what's in your community. For the Nebraska Coalition, If people have extra financial resources, we do have a donation page. And then for folks who don't, because I know it is the holidays and sometimes we're strapped for money, we do have social media pages where we do calls for action. We keep updates on policy happening across the state or events or ways that folks can get involved. So you can also follow us there. We do public education sometimes for community members to make sure everyone has the tools to be a part of the solution. So those are the different ways people can give through money, time, and resources, or they can follow us online to figure out how to get more involved and kind of follow through with these call to actions that we have throughout the year.
Good. Alex, I deeply appreciate your work, and I appreciate you taking time to talk to our audience today.
Thank you for having me here, and thank you for creating this platform. And I'm excited to see where you and your audience and we can all take this together.
Alex, thank you very, very much for joining me today. And thanks for the work you do to protect victims of sexual abuse. It's some of the most important work anyone can do. So thank you. Hey, if you like this show, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube and leave a comment about this show. I suspect we're going to get a few. Hey, say thanks to the Parsons team who made this show possible. Chase Porter, our executive producer. Ike Simonis, producer and graphic design. Penology, Text Solutions. And Kim Remington, director of operations. And thanks to each of you for your support. It's deeply appreciated. Okay, that's today's show. Thanks for tuning in. Now, please go do good things. I'm Dan Parsons.